These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 9. It is so incredibly important. If you're on the right foundation for life in the ministry, then you're going to have the right foundation for a healthy family. Our statistic today from pastoralcareinc.com is this: 80% of those that took this survey believe that pastoral ministry has negatively affected their families. Many pastors' children do not attend church now because of what the church has done to their parents. You can find the link to that in the episode notes that has a whole bunch of statistics on ministry and on family life and everything in between. Talk about a crisis. Okay, 4 out of 5 believe that pastoral ministry, that the office of ministry, has negatively affected their families. To be healthy leaders, we need to be having healthy families. Healthy families require healthy marriages. Healthy marriages are ones that are built on the right foundation. Well, today, we have special guests. I mentioned them in the last episode. We have Chris and MJ Humby on the show. They've been in ministry together for over 20 years, and they're going to share how they've navigated all of this together. Welcome to episode 21 of the Total Ministry Makeover. Welcome to the Total Ministry Makeover. On this podcast, we have one goal: to lead church leaders on the right foundation for life in the ministry. Regardless of the size of your church or the size of your leadership, if you follow the steps of the Total Ministry Makeover, it'll dynamically change how you lead in the church, and by extension, how your church will reach your part of the world for Jesus Christ. I'm Shane Thacker, your host. Thanks for joining the show. We are jumping right in with special guests, Chris and MJ Humby. So excited to have you guys on the show today.
Excited to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you talked about earlier before the recording that you were playing Uber all week. Now, what's this all about? Are you driving with Uber, or are you just literally being the chauffeur?
Well, we have 2 teenagers that work and are taking night classes, so we're driving them all over, plus Boy Scouts, and our daughter just started running. And it's just, everybody's doing something.
It's all in.
It would be nice to be making some money, but honestly, they have money to make, you know. So.
You gotta start charging them.
We have done that before, and right now they're still in that transition spot of, I need a job, you know.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. So just to kind of get to know you guys a little bit, you have how many kids? Do you want to share that real quick?
We have 750 kids.
750. That sounds about right. Whenever I was looking at the camp.
Yep, kids, the youth kids, our kids, that kind of feels that way.
But our own kids, we have 6 kids of our own.
5 boys and 1 girl.
Yeah, ranging from 2 years old to 19 years old.
So amazing. That's awesome. Awesome. So just for fun, if you could tell about your life in the ministry in just one word, what would it be?
Well, we had an argument about this earlier. You said one word, and so MJ chose 2.
No, roller coaster is 1 word.
Roller coaster is only 1.
If it's hyphenated, we can count it as 1. So
okay, fine. I see how this is going to go. She's going to get all the credit for this.
She's going to win regardless, right?
Exactly. Mine is definitely adventurous. So we both, it's up and down, but it's fun no matter what.
Adventure and roller coasters too.
That's true. Except when they go off the rails.
Right. We didn't say it was a connected roller coaster. We just said roller coaster. No. Love it. Well, if you would, tell us about yourself, time in the ministry, anything pertinent along those lines.
Well, we've been married 23 years. We said earlier we had 6 kids. We've been in ministry about 20 years if you count all of the internships, volunteer work. Because we started while we were in college. We were non-traditional students, and we got married in 99 and then decided to start school in 2002.
We were actually part of the same youth group growing up in Rochester, New York.
That's awesome.
So we were youth group sweethearts. And so she's 3 years younger than me, and I chased her for a number of years, and I was friend zoned all that time. And apparently I wore her down, so.
Well, our first official date was actually a ruse for my 16th birthday party.
Yep.
Love it. That is awesome. Okay, and so you've been in various ministries. You've been in Rochester, right? Wasn't that where
That's correct.
And then where did you go from there?
We moved to Oklahoma. My undergrad is from Oklahoma Wesleyan University in pastoral ministry. We ended up solo ministering for about 7 years. Had an opportunity to get into youth ministry. And we were constantly, people would constantly say, well, youth ministry really is just that stepping stone into senior ministry. So we did it opposite.
We did everything opposite.
But we like what we do. And then in 2013, we looked at just the way the country was going, and looked at our kids as we kept adding more kids, and we sat there and prayed about where God really wanted us to spend the rest of our lives. And by this time, we had already been corrupted by the Midwest in our morality. So we knew New York was not where we were supposed to be. So we moved out of there in 2013, took the first ministry we could. We ended up spending 7 years in the panhandle of Oklahoma. And just recently in 2020, moved back to Bartlesville, and where I serve as the family minister here at Town and Country Christian Church.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Got to give a shout out to Town and Country. And so you said 2020. Was this before the pandemic, or was this after
January
March?
1st. We moved in January 1st.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you just got started, and then bam, right?
I literally got to know my students for 10 weeks before we went into quarantine. I had no contact information.
Oh my goodness.
We had new kids coming, and all the hype was go online, connect with your kids. I'm like, I have no way of doing this.
How awful. That really is tough, because especially as a newcomer, because have you lived in Bartlesville before or had any connection with the community?
It's been 17 years.
You've been, that's right. Okay. That's right.
We were in Bartlesville for college, and actually it's a funny backup story. We tried to have a child when we first got married, and couldn't.
In New York.
As soon as I started classes, I found out I was 6 weeks pregnant.
Right.
So by the time he graduated, we were expecting number 2.
Wow.
And so our first ministry was, like you said, it was in Kansas. And then after having 2 kids and being so far from family, we were just really homesick. Well, I was really homesick. So we ended up going back to New York. And I don't know if that was a Jonah thing, because we ended up feeling like, why did we go back, until we moved back out west? So. But
God eventually moved us back, and we've seen tremendous growth in not only our family, but the ministries we've been part of.
Yeah, I have no doubt about it. Those that don't know, I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, Chris and I were connected through the church camp at Hidden Haven Christian Camp They were looking for a speaker, and that's where I actually spoke. Chris was the contact person who somehow had faith in me enough to book me. So thank you for that, Chris. I just really was blessed by that week for sure, and meeting you all there. So,
and we were definitely blessed by, you bring the word, and the Holy Spirit definitely moved that week, and it's awesome to see what happens when you're in God's will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really truly believe that was well within God's plan. So, so yeah, moving on in here in the show. From the beginning of this episode, I shared the statistic from Pastoral Care Inc., and that says that 80% of those that they surveyed believe pastoral ministry has negatively affected their families. Many pastors' children do not attend church now because of what the church has done to their parents. You guys have 6 kids, but based on your experience in ministry and all that, do you think this statistic is pretty accurate or no?
I think we both agree, yes.
It really is.
We've seen a lot of friends leave ministry, and my sister's also in ministry. I don't know if you knew that, but
That's
her
awesome.
kids, we've seen that with her kids as well. And her daughter actually just came back to the Lord just recently.
Wonderful.
Well,
it's hard that it took that toll, but
yeah.
You were telling me about a conversation you had with our oldest yesterday about this very topic.
Well, I had mentioned Statistic, and I asked our oldest if he had any feelings on that, because he's 19. I mean, he's just coming to that age of making those decisions whether he's going to be in church or not. And he said he remembers earlier on in our ministry where we were really struggling, where the church had said things or done things, and he'd heard stories of us talking and just remembering how it had affected us. And he doesn't remember the specifics, but he just remembers seeing us go through it, and it was challenging for him.
Well, and it's hard to, especially when you're in ministry, and the average stay of most ministers is about 2.5 years. Especially in one of the denominations I left before I got to the independent Christian church. It was, we never knew what next Sunday was going to look like. So we didn't know, if we were going to stay or we were going to go. And that played a lot of toll or put a lot of toll on our kids. And so, I mean, they were very aware of maybe not the ins and outs of why mom and dad were always upset or frustrated. But they were aware that the church was a good portion of it.
Yeah. And I would argue that, that every pastoral ministry at some level, there's going to be a time when it negatively affects your family. And
right.
You just have to be, in my opinion, you have to be prepared for that. And you have to figure out how to shield your kids from that. And that's great.
And there's no classes of that.
But a lot of times we, as ministers, going blind, if we're young, right out of college, a lot of times what we want to do is we want to change the world. We want to see people come to know Jesus, and we think that we're invincible. And rather than being smart and being patient and being sensitive to even the needs and concerns of the congregations we serve, sometimes we get ahead of God. And so, so that negative feelings sometimes is our own fault. Sometimes it's just the callousness of people in the congregation. Sometimes it's misdirected. The phrase that's often used is, hurt people. And not, as a young minister, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize a lot of that. And so I really wish that, if I had to go back and do it again, I probably wouldn't have put my family through a lot of that stuff, because I'm older, wiser. I found that the longer I stay in ministry, the longer my ministries are. I know it sounds simple, but
right.
It's true. I mean, if I go in with a thought of, well, at the first mistake, I'm out, or the first time my nose is broken, I'm out, or the first disagreement I have, I'm out, because this isn't what Jesus intended for the church to look like. Well, that's my ego. And unfortunately, my ego has at times played a negative effect on the position and the way that the church was viewed. Now that I'm older, I would definitely do things different, and I would probably I would do ministry a little bit different than I do. Simply because I have those scars now that I look back at and say, okay, was this me or was this the church?
Yeah.
Was this caused by something that was in my life, or was this something that the church did? And in that, understanding that it does have a direct impact on my family, that's money right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about your scars. That's what you learned from, and that's why you have that wisdom today.
That's right. That's right.
Ideally, it wouldn't take the scars, but that's usually not how that works.
Right.
So, well, the last episode, I did a top 10 Q&A with pastors, and today Chris and MJ are going to share their top 6 list of what they see as the top killers of unity in marriage. We'll be right back after a short break. It's amazing what a pack of wolves can do to their prey, and quickly. On many occasions, they don't even see or hear them coming until it's too late. It's no wonder that Paul would give us this warning about wolves in Acts 20. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. Verse 29 says, I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and will not spare the flock. Even though Paul gave this warning to the Ephesian elders, there's no question that it should be echoed today. There's no question that Satan is doing anything he can to thwart our marriages, like what we're talking about with Chris and MJ, but he's trying to thwart the church as a whole. That being said, we need to be asking this question. How do I fend off the wolves in the church? I want to encourage you to check out my latest blog, Fending Off Wolves, and I offered 3 ways that we can do that, and 3 ways to answer this question. Now back to the show. We're back with Chris and MJ, and you guys have your list of the top 6 killers of unity in marriage, because this is so important. We know it negatively affects the families. We know it negatively at times, and if we're not careful, we will find ourselves in a lot of trouble. So if you would, go ahead and fire away.
The first one we had was misarrangement of priorities. And with that, it should be God, spouse, family, kids, and then everything else.
Ultimately, unfortunately, there's a lot of times where our priorities get out of whack. There's a great book by Francis and Lisa Chan called You and Me Forever. In the book, one of the premises is that Francis doesn't want to just love his wife. He doesn't want to just support his wife. Instead, what he wants to do is make sure that as the head of the house, that he sees his wife in heaven. So by putting her as a priority over God, it actually makes that balance of priorities out of line. So in the book, it's all about coming back into balance. It's about rearranging our priorities. And if we are going to have a strong marriage, the foundation really has to be that God is that center. So whether it's myself or MJ, we need to make sure that our relationship with God is as strong as it possibly can be. Then we start caring for our spouse.
Absolutely.
Because God didn't call my wife to be a follower of me. God called my wife to be a follower of him. So that's the number one thing, that we need to make sure that that there isn't a misalignment of our priorities. After we have God as that center, then it's our spouse. We start pouring into our spouse. Then it's our families. And there's a lot of times where after we get into that second and third spot, competition arises for those different priorities. And that's where a lot of the misalignment happens.
Yeah, especially I think kids are really good at getting in that top spot. They try to push their way up there. I know it's cute with our youngest. It's cute, but it's also frustrating. Like if Chris and I even hug, he tries to get between us so that we're hugging him rather than hugging each other. But it's just a physical view of what happens oftentimes that we don't even realize is happening with them trying to move their way up the chain.
Now, I just want to validate something. Did I hear you say that kids can get us out of alignment?
Oh, yeah. Well, and sometimes it's us putting the kids out of that alignment.
Absolutely.
I mean, how many times do we chase after our kids instead of spending time in our devotions?
Yeah.
Or how many times, do we have a quiet moment with our spouse, and all of a sudden you hear "mommy," and that connection is now broken. There are just times where we have to learn to say no.
Master manipulators.
They are master manipulators.
Yeah.
They want our energy. They want what they want because they're selfish. So we need to make sure that we are making sure that those priorities are aligned. And with different relationships with different leaders, those priorities are going to change. So I mean, sometimes you can handle 2 kids and you can balance the spouse and 2 kids because you're playing man-to-man defense kind of thing.
I like that. It's so true.
With us, we play zone defense, and we have to, and then we have to call in from the bench the older ones to help us at times too. So there's definitely a need to align the priorities based on your marriage so that you can function to the best of your ability for God's glory.
Yeah. Love that. There's the first one, right? So what's the second one there?
Misalignment of direction.
Misalignment of direction.
We talked about dreams, hopes, and future, aligning with your together as a couple, aligning your focus on where the family as a unit as a whole is going.
One of the things we learned early on was that if we're going in 2 different directions, the marriage wasn't going to work.
Creates friction, and then that friction in turn creates miscommunication, and it just snowballs. Right.
I mean, when we moved to Oklahoma the very first time, I don't remember this because apparently I'm losing my mind. But apparently I said some very hurtful words like, "I'm going to Oklahoma with or without you."
Oh man.
Well,
yeah.
That put a lot of tension and a lot of stress on MJ. And so that's something that she's carried for a long time. And, we're much better now. But early on, that was definitely had potential for destroying that unity.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to go one way and she wanted to go another way. And because we weren't working together in parallel, it ended up causing us to go in 2 different directions. And now that I look back at it years later, that one statement really set the tone for where we went years later. So I mean, there was a point where we seriously were looking at divorcing. That I was going to take the kids and I was going to go my own way, and she was fighting me on it, and it just came down to this need to be humbled and figure out, what do we want out of life? What are our dreams? What are our hopes? What is the future? Do we have a future together?
Goals.
Do we have goals? And we started setting those little goals. And once we started setting those little goals, we found that there was a realignment of our direction. And
that's amazing.
We still go off on tangents from time to time. Sometimes I want bacon for dinner and she wants salad, but we've learned to work within that, the differences to realign to one single difference.
The big goals are the same. They're in alignment. It's the little stuff because when you have those big goals in alignment, that's where it really matters the most. And I wanted to say something because I just wanted to piggyback on what you said. You said you started with little goals, and that's what helped restore that relationship. If there's some listeners out there right now that are on the verge of divorce, what would you tell them? Like how would they have some little goals? What would that look like?
I'm not sure what to say on that. Hold on. Sorry, you just caught me off guard on that one. But
sorry.
No, you're good. I think the first step is just the communication. I think that needs to be at the beginning. And then setting like maybe seek counseling, help through some goals together.
Which actually leads into the very next one.
Perfect.
Is number 3. I mean, so if things, these sort of build off of each other, okay, the misalignment of priorities, that we need to have aligned priorities first. That's the foundation. The next one is, if we don't have our priorities off, often we have this misdirection of life goals and whatnot. The next one is, we really need to, what leads to that is the lack of honest and open communication. So, I mean, if someone is, struggling with this idea of separation, of breaking the marriage vow, the marriage commitment, communication needs to be there. Yeah. And there needs to be that open and honest conversation.
And sometimes you need to bring in a third party if it's not something that you guys that two people can resolve on their own. Sometimes just having that third person there to guide the conversation and to make sure that it's not you always or you never, because those are really communication killers. They are attacking, they're not resolving.
And that third party not being your mother.
No. They're not
third party being an impartial
counselor or a pastor or a position.
Absolutely. And that communication, whenever you mention that about having the right communication, all that is shining a light on the darkness. And that's really what it boils down to. And there may be a darkness in your heart or the other or both, and it's just shining a light on it all and saying, God, help us. And I love that. So go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. Once we've established some communication, the number 4 one is that we need to be aware of our blind spots. Sometimes when we are unaware of the blind spots in our lives, they act as poison pills. Or there's a song out several years ago called "Slow Fade," and that's exactly what happens. There are definitely times in our lives where things happen to cause a much bigger mountain of issues than what we're thinking is really the problem. I was talking to MJ yesterday about this very thing, and we're trying to figure out, well, what does this look like? And in the best illustration I came up with was this idea of, if I'm in a car and I'm traveling, I can't see everything behind me. I'm unaware of those things. But if she's on the side of me, and she can tell me, hey, there's something here that is going to cause danger, it's going to cause harm, be aware of this.
Yeah.
And I can do the same thing with her. That's where that partnership comes in. But if there's not that lack of honest and open conversation, if there's a misalignment of direction and there's a misarrangement of priorities, then the blind spots tend to be neglected, and they become that poison pill that end up killing the marriage eventually. And it can be, it doesn't even have to be moral. It doesn't have to be, oh, I cheated on my wife. It could simply be, who are you talking to on your phone? Every single time we're having a conversation, your phone dings and you look at it. Well, who are you talking to? And that starts causing resentment. It starts causing mistrust and friction in the marriage. We need to really make sure that we're guarding our heart from those things.
Yeah. So recap on this: misarrangement of priorities, misalignment of direction in your life versus my life, lack of open and honest communication, and unawareness of blind spots. We got 2 more. Yep. These are great. Love this.
Number 5 is misuse of finances. Lack of agreement on use of funds, selfishness, one person's desires, needs over the other person's needs.
Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going on great vacations or, buying that newest video game. But, when you're not paying attention to the conversations and the needs of your spouse, there's some real issues there.
The thing that comes to my mind while we talk about this is Fireproof. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but there's the main character wants to buy a boat, and his wife has elderly parents who really need physical things for their health, And it isn't until he puts his need for the boat aside and puts her need to help her parents first that their relationship comes back to unity. And so that was just something that came through my mind while we were talking about this.
By the time someone gets to this point, though, usually it's on its way out. By this time, people are looking at separate bank accounts. They're looking at, well, I have my money and she has her money. And that then you start wondering, well, what are they spending their money on? Why are they going here? What are they doing? And again, it just creates this lack of unity in the marriage, that if they had just been open and honest, if they had been aware of those blind spots, if they had a shared direction and just kept priorities correct, the finances wouldn't even be an issue. But if you look at statistics, finances is one of the biggest reasons couples divorce.
Yeah, it's in the top 3.
Not morality. It's finances.
Yeah. Well, and I've found that I was leading FPU, the Financial Peace University, from Dave Ramsey, and I've had different people ask questions over the years. And one lady asked me, she goes, my husband said he'd go with this part of the budget, but every time we go, every time I turn around, he's spending like way, way beyond what he said. And I have to point to myself on this. I mean, there's times that I mess up in this way too, but I just challenged her. I said, your husband's not walking in integrity. He's not doing what he said he was going to do, and you need to just challenge him on it. And that's hard from the girl's perspective. Usually that's very difficult to bring that up, but what Dave Ramsey recommends in those situations is that if a wife is upset about something like that, just to say, I am scared because of the way you are spending finances. Our money it's not in alignment. It's not together. We need to be unified. And that's something that I think most marriages struggle at some point or another with. And there's times that we spend more or we're not thinking. We just do what feels good in the moment, and that's a problem. So that's great. That was number 5. I love that one.
And then the last one is just, there's an overall mistrust. If any of these are taking root and any of these are just causing a disturbance within the force kind of thing, then it's going to lead to mistrust. And there's not much that can be done to not cause trust at that point, or cause mistrust at that point. So, I mean, you didn't mow the lawn when I asked you to. Well, why? Because you care more about this. And it just causes some massive...
It snowballs at this point.
Snowball effects. And, so, I mean, there's always restoration. There's always the hope.
Yes.
But we never want to get to that point of mistrusting our spouse.
Yeah. And that when they do something and we just assume the worst about what they're doing, we just assume their intentions are bad. I mean, all that is exactly what you said. It just snowballs. It's disastrous, and that's great. So you two, you talk more on topics like these quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah, we do. We actually have our own podcast called In the Trenches with Chris and MJ. And this actually stemmed out of a conversation we had when we went to Focus on the Family, their marriage encounter, or Weekend to Remember, back in April. And so we went to the marriage encounter, married 23 years. We looked at the people that were up there. We'd been married just as long as them. And we sat there and said,
this sounds familiar.
We've
been talking about this
stuff. We do this on a regular basis, And so that sort of got thinking to either we write a book together or we start something that would be a conversation between the two of us. We have some amazing conversations when it's just the two of us, and we wanted to share that information.
Yeah.
The reason we call it In the Trenches is because in World War I, a lot of the warfare was trench warfare. And so you would have soldiers from all different countries, coming together, all fighting together. And the thing that got most soldiers through the battle or through the war was the stories. So you would have Joe from Tennessee tell about his mama and the best pecan pie or pecan pie, depending on where you're from.
Pecan.
Pecan, I don't know. And you would have Phil from Philly jump in, and he would tell his story. And it was the stories that got them through this horrible event in their lives. Well, we've already gone through a lot of those horrible moments. And so we're in the trenches, and we want to be there with others to help them get through their horrible times as well.
Not just horrible times, but encouragement too, of times that are good, and just spurring each other on.
Yeah, love that. And you guys, you have quite the story to share. Just what you shared during this podcast. What I have done is I'm going to have a link of both. You mentioned a book by Francis Chan.
Yep.
And I will have that in the episode notes, but I will also have your podcast in the episode notes as well, and we'll be sure and put that for anyone. We hope you guys that are listening would check that out, because they have a great story. Obviously, what you just heard was, you guys did awesome. Thanks for sharing that. The 6 killers of unity in marriage. That's not exactly a topic that most people would would go, man, I really want to listen in on this, but really, we need to hear this. This is something that we need to hear for sure.
Well, and if we don't discuss it, I mean, we're just going to sit in silence.
Yeah.
And it needs to be said, because whether you're a leader in the church, especially if you're a leader in the church, you need to be aware of these, because a lot of times our focus is the church, or our focus is our relationship with God, and it's not our marriage. And we really need to be having those. One of the best advice I ever got was from another family member that's in ministry, and he sat there and said, you got to put your family first above the church. It's got to be a priority, and that's been my model, and that's been our model, and we've strove for that every step of the way.
And ironically, when you do that, your ministry thrives all the more, and
right.
That's exactly it. I love that. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining today and being part of the show. Really love your heart on that, and being transparent like you are. You guys are doing a great job and a great work in Bartlesville as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing if a book does come out. We really we want to be sure and put a plug in on that as well. So
absolutely. Well, and your listeners, if they want, they can also visit our Facebook page, In the Trenches with Chris and MJ. We're constantly putting stuff and content out there, not just our podcast, but just encouragement to get you through the trenches.
Love it. That will also be in the episode notes of this episode. I just repeated myself, didn't I? Hey,
that's what editing's for.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much, and appreciate you joining today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. God bless.
You too.
It is so incredibly encouraging to hear Chris and MJ's story. I hope you found that encouragement today yourself, and in your own marriage. Maybe your family has been harmed directly by being in ministry. And it may be because of these 6 killers of unity in marriage that they talked about. I encourage you to work through that together in your marriage and look at what they did. Look at what they did. They clung to Christ in the midst of it all. That's what it's all about. That's how you get on the right foundation for life in the marriage, for life in the ministry, and anything else in between. If you want to hear more stories from them, you can find their podcast in the episode notes, as well as the Facebook group. And I want to encourage Chris and MJ, and I would like to bless them from those that are listening. Would you be willing to go to that group and to just comment your encouragement to them for being on the show? Maybe something specific they said that resonated with you. Please do that and bless them for being on the show. That is our thank you to them as a special guest today. As for the Total Ministry Makeover, I removed the subscription feature, which is the paid monthly subscription, because first of all, no one was doing it. Secondly, I don't want to do things that way. I don't want to, I did it because this was with Podbean, and I like Podbean's service, don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to continue doing things that way. What I'm instead going to do is say that if you want to be a part of the financial support of this podcast, there are subscriptions required to get this going. It's through Podbean and through other places. If you want to be a part financially supporting in any way, it's not going to be a monthly subscription. You can just give a one-time amount through Venmo. And I have put that in there. Anything that is given, 10% of all funds will go directly to our supporting mission, AICM. And so if you want to learn more about that mission, you can also go to AICM.org. But otherwise, if you have questions, if you need mentorship, if you need to work through a specific situation in ministry, I want to help you out. Shoot me a message. I will be glad to talk you through whatever's going on in your life in the ministry. And we'll talk about how to get from where you are to the right foundation. That right foundation for life in the ministry. Thank you so much for joining today, and God bless.